Imagine a room full of people. No one attacks you, no one confronts you, no one threatens you. Yet as you breathe, someone has already decided they can speak over you, dismiss your opinion, and use your name without respect. It wasn't a word that lowered your value. It was the way you exist in front of others. Most men don't lose through direct blows. They lose through leakage, drooping shoulders, eyes searching for approval, an anxious smile, the rush to explain, the misplaced laugh. These small, almost invisible signals act as a silent announcement. There is no danger here. The body speaks first. The voice only confirms the verdict. And those who understand this invisible language dominate those who don't. Machiavelli was never obsessed with brute strength. He studied what remains unspoken: gestures, hesitations, reactions. In public, a man who cannot hide his weaknesses walks unarmed among social predators disguised as civilized people. They don't shout or attack directly. They simply classify you by what you reveal without noticing. If you fail to identify these errors, you live being read and downgraded by people who aren't smarter, only more observant. While you try to be agreeable, your body negotiates your value downward. This video is not about appearing strong. It is about preventing the world from using your own weakness against you before you even open your mouth. Error 1. The posture that begs for approval. Posture is the first language of power, and most men use it against themselves without realizing it. When the body contracts, when the neck leans slightly forward, when the shoulders collapse, it delivers a silent story of submission. Nothing said afterward matters. The body has already announced a lower position in the invisible hierarchy, and in any public setting, that hierarchy dictates who is heard, interrupted, or dismissed. Throughout history, posture has served as a symbol of dominance. Kings, generals, and leaders never needed many words to define territory. Occupying space without hesitation was enough. An upright body is not aesthetic. It's a statement. In Rome, a slouched man was seen as someone burdened by guilt or seeking mercy. Today, the same pattern repeats itself in offices, meetings, and social circles. When a man bends his spine, he bends his perceived value. Posture is a silent narrative. It tells others whether you are a stable presence or someone asking permission to exist. When you move with uncertain stiffness, adjust your clothes excessively, or shrink yourself to avoid drawing attention, you signal that you are ready to accept whatever terms are imposed. Observers notice this instantly and understand that boundaries can be crossed without resistance. Territory is lost long before conflict ever appears. Consider the fragility exposed in small gestures: a restless foot revealing anxiety, a torso leaning too far forward when criticized, a neck recoiling under firmer gazes. Each detail acts as a crack in the armor. Machiavelli would say that a man who cannot control his physical presence loses before negotiation even begins, because he has already surrendered the authority to define how he will be treated. Posture is not meant to seek approval. It is meant to impose perception. When it fails, everything built on top of it collapses. Error 2. The need to be noticed. Some men walk into a room carrying an invisible weight, the desperate urge to be seen. They speak louder than necessary, gesture more than required, and exaggerate reactions to attract eyes that never asked for their presence. This effort doesn't create respect, it creates noise. Authority never comes from trying to be noticed. It comes from existing without asking for space. When someone forces attention, he reveals his own neediness long before he shows any strength. True presence doesn't compete. It asserts itself quietly, like a structure that doesn't need to be announced. The difference between presence and dependence lies in the internal movement. The first observes, the second begs for recognition. Machiavelli would say that the man who tries to look strong exposes his cracks, because his strength isn't perceived as natural but as performance. And every performance has fractures, especially when it comes from insecurity. The desire to be noticed appears in small details: the exaggerated laugh meant to guarantee acceptance, the stories told with forced volume, the anxiety to fill silence, the glance that searches for immediate reactions. Each gesture reveals that self-worth depends on external approval. In the social game, anyone who needs validation automatically places himself in a lower position. Dominance is not measured by the number of eyes watching you, but by your ability to exist whole without them. In environments where hierarchy is implicit, meetings, social circles, male groups, the man who seeks attention gives away his weak point. He becomes predictable, easy to manipulate, guided effortlessly by praise or indifference. All it takes is someone ignoring him for his balance to crumble, and this instability is instantly read as weakness. The man who truly possesses strength does not chase attention. He allows others to notice that their gaze has no influence over his axis. That calculated indifference is what defines power. Error 3. The out-of-place smile. The automatic smile is one of the mind's quickest confessions. It appears before thought, before intention, before posture. When a man smiles without a clear reason, what he truly exposes is his need for acceptance. It's a gesture designed to soften tensions that only exist for someone who fears rejection. In public dynamics, this reflex becomes a signature of weakness. Anyone who tries to soften the environment signals that he doesn't control anything within it. Socially, an out-of-context smile is read as emotional submission. It communicates that you're willing to give up ground to avoid discomfort, even when no one demanded such a concession. People with authority don't smile to justify themselves. They smile when they choose to, and for specific purposes. Without that level of control, the smile becomes a request for approval. In male hierarchies, this gesture works like an open gate, one that places you at the bottom before you speak. Leaders and manipulators understand the strategic value of the smile. They use it as a tool, not a reflex. A general steadies his troops with a precise smile. A negotiator disarms an opponent without appearing hostile. A manipulator smiles to draw someone in before applying pressure. In all cases, the smile is intentional, measured, and used as a social weapon. The ordinary man, however, smiles by impulse, and every impulse can be anticipated and therefore controlled. When you smile without reason, you give up your mystery. You show that you're trying to dissolve tensions only the insecure care about, and in doing so, you allow others to identify the exact point where they can press you. Machiavelli understood that power depends on keeping intentions concealed. The impulsive smile reveals more than any spoken word, because it exposes your inner structure. The man who controls his face controls the narrative. The one who doesn't ends up speaking too much, even in silence. Error 4. Over-explaining. When a man feels the constant need to justify himself, he reveals his position before he even finishes the sentence. He is beneath the other. Excessive explanation isn't clarity, it's confession. It appears when the mind fears being misunderstood, rejected, or discredited. Others read that fear instantly, because those who hold authority don't try to persuade, they simply state. Every extra word is a step away from one's own center, a reminder that internal stability is still absent. Over-explaining exposes insecurity not only in content but in identity. The man who rushes to clarify every detail believes his presence alone isn't enough to support what he says. He waters down his message to avoid friction, the kind only the fragile try to escape. In social or professional settings, this habit turns any conversation into vulnerable ground. All it takes is a simple question for him to unravel into a long justification, revealing the exact points where he can be pressured. Machiavelli and other strategists understood the power of selective silence. They spoke less to observe more. The absence of explanations creates a fog, and in the fog, the observer holds the advantage. When you over-explain, you hand over your motivations, your doubts, your fears, and your need for approval. Every detail you offer narrows your control. It's like opening windows in a fortress meant to remain opaque. People place more trust in those who communicate with clarity but without excess. Conciseness signals conviction, while wordiness suggests instability. And in public dynamics, instability attracts social predators. The man who talks too much believes he's gaining understanding, when in truth he's losing ground. Words are a tool of power only when used with precision. Outside that, they become unnecessary exposure. Authority doesn't explain itself, it stands. Error 5. Reacting with emotion. Emotional reaction is the easiest breach to exploit in a man. When someone touches your pride and you respond too quickly, you expose the entire architecture of your mind. In that instant, your armor breaks. A sharp look, a subtle criticism, a dismissive gesture. None of this harms a man who has consolidated an inner axis. Reacting is admitting that the other person triggered something you do not control. And in the public game, the one who reacts first loses. Explicit emotion operates like an open window. Immediate anger reveals impulsiveness. Discomfort exposes insecurity. Irritation signals fragility. Every fast response is read as a failure of containment. A man who becomes emotional over small stimuli reveals he can be manipulated by larger ones. This is how leaders test subordinates, how rivals measure character, and how ordinary people, often without realizing it, discover your vulnerability. Emotional instability doesn't need to be intense to be dangerous. It only needs to be visible. Imagine your internal structure as armor. Cracks don't appear in grand battles, but in subtle frictions. A minor provocation, an awkward comment, a delay, an unexpected silence. If any of this destabilizes you, your armor isn't firm. Ancient strategies, used by generals and statesmen, were built on reading reactions before moving pieces. Machiavelli understood that the emotional man gives away more than he intends, because emotion does not ask permission to manifest. It simply breaks in. Power is born from two forces, containment and intention. When you react, you lose both. The other person learns how to strike you, when to pressure you, and where your structure collapses. This creates an emotional map that will be used against you, consciously or not. The man who controls his emotion controls the narrative. He observes, records, and only responds when he decides, never when provoked. Stability is the real strength. Everything else is just noise from someone who hasn't mastered himself. Error 6. Micro-seeking validation. In public settings, most men expose themselves not through grand gestures but through minimal, almost invisible movements. It's the quick glance to check whether someone approved what they said. It's the restrained laugh that slips out just to fill silence. It's the automatic adjustment of clothing the moment they feel observed. These micro-gestures, as small as breaths, form a clear narrative. My sense of security depends on how others react to me, and anyone who notices this, even subconsciously, immediately places that man lower in the social hierarchy. Micro-seeking validation creates the image of dependency. It doesn't matter how strong you believe you are. If your muscles tighten under a mild critical look, if your expression shifts when someone averts their eyes, if your hands correct details on your body just to appear acceptable, the message is simple. You need approval. In any group, this behavior turns you into a malleable figure. People who perceive this, even the seemingly kind ones, learn to guide you through calculated indifference or controlled approval. Both work as invisible leashes. In ancient power structures, royal courts, military councils, social rituals, these subtle signals determine status. The man who held an unchanging posture was seen as authority. The man who searched for micro-confirmations was recognized as someone whose internal value could be manipulated. The same dynamic exists today, only far more quietly. No one tells you they noticed your hesitation. They simply react to it. And while you try to appear composed, your body broadcasts emotional dependence with surgical precision. Machiavelli would interpret these details as strategic weaknesses. He understood that the man who seeks tiny signs of approval becomes predictable. All it takes to destabilize him is denying what he craves. A smile, a nod, a minimal acknowledgement. Power is not built only on what you display. It is built on what you do not seek. A man who does not chase validation sends a different message entirely. He needs no one to authorize his existence, and that kind of presence changes the way the world responds to him. Error 7. The fear of silence. Silence exposes more than any spoken word. It creates a space where only those with internal structure remain intact, which is why so many men fear it. When confronted with long pauses, they feel the urge to fill them, to explain themselves, to soften the atmosphere. Every attempt to break the silence reveals anxiety, instability, and a dependence on external control. A man who cannot sustain his own silence shows that he needs noise to avoid facing his own vulnerability. Silence is the ultimate tool of power because it reverses the dynamic. While most people panic to fill the void, the one who controls the pause simply observes. He studies the other person's breathing, notices hesitations, identifies intentions, and measures strength. Those who cannot withstand silence expose their weaknesses within seconds. They shift their expressions, change their posture, and display visible discomfort. The inability to remain still and quiet is a confession in itself, the modern equivalent of lowering one's guard before an enemy who hasn't even attacked. Metaphorically, silence functions as a mirror. In it, the weak see themselves, and they dislike what they find. Silence demands presence, alignment, and self-mastery. It rejects masks. Anyone lacking inner stability collapses at the first moment of sonic absence. Everyone around perceives this. It doesn't take a manipulator to notice when someone loses structure in the presence of their own stillness. It only takes awareness to see who truly controls himself and who is hiding internal chaos. Ancient strategic manuals already taught that silence was a weapon, not an absence. In negotiations, it unbalanced the opponent. In psychological battles, it broke confidence. In courts and councils, it forced leaders to reveal nerves they intended to hide. Machiavelli would understand this principle perfectly. The one who controls silence controls the rhythm, and the one who controls the rhythm controls the territory. The man who fears silence gives up ground without realizing it. The man who holds it creates the atmosphere in which everyone else must breathe. There comes a moment when the game stops being external and turns inward. It doesn't matter how many environments you enter, how many people you study, or how many strategies you memorize. None of it matters if you can't recognize the exact point where you surrender without noticing. Each of the 7 errors has different roots, but they all reveal the same truth. There is a place within you where power slips away quietly. That place defines how the world reads you before you say anything. The real question isn't which errors you make, but which one governs your reactions. Is it the posture that collapses? The need to be noticed? The automatic smile that exposes vulnerability? The excessive explanations that reflect insecurity? The emotion that erupts before thought? The micro-search for validation that signals dependence? Or the fear of silence that reveals internal instability? Every man carries a weak point he tries to hide, but the body reveals it without hesitation, and the world, even without intent, responds to that exposure. The Machiavellian reflection begins when you identify the weakness that controls you, not as guilt, but as strategic diagnosis. Understanding where you break is the first step in preventing others from learning how to bend you. Ask yourself, at what moment does my presence become negotiable? In which gesture does my authority disappear? In which reaction am I predictable? The answer won't bring comfort, only accuracy. And that accuracy is what separates the aware man from the man who is led. If you observe yourself without rushing to justify anything, you'll notice patterns that once passed unnoticed. You'll see where you give up space, where you try to please, where you dilute your own strength out of habit. The final question is simple but sharp. Which error controls you before you control the world around you? From that answer, the path to rebuild your presence begins, not with theatrical force, but with real self-command. Quiet, consistent, and unshakable. Eliminating these 7 mistakes is not an aesthetic gesture. It is an internal reconstruction. When your posture stops begging for approval, your body begins to communicate authority before any word is spoken. When the need for attention fades, your presence gains weight, not because it tries to be seen, but because it stands firm on its own. The smile stops functioning as a plea for acceptance and becomes a strategic tool used only when it serves a purpose. Each layer of regained control reshapes the way the world responds to your existence. By abandoning excessive explanation, you create mystery, and mystery is always interpreted as strength. When your emotions stop reacting impulsively, your mind becomes secure territory, unreachable for anyone attempting to manipulate or provoke you. Micro-gestures disappear, and with them the social dependence that placed you in an inferior position. Every movement becomes deliberate, every glance calculated, every gesture proof that you no longer need validation to sustain your identity. Then comes the decisive point: mastery of silence. A man who does not fear silence reshapes the hierarchy around him. He does not need to fill space to appear strong. His calmness exposes the instability of others. The environment begins to adjust to his rhythm, not the opposite. This is where the archetype of the untouchable man is born. Someone whose presence cannot be easily invaded, whose emotions cannot be exploited, and whose mind cannot be read. A man who carries his own fortress, invisible, yet unmistakably felt. The transformation is not immediately visible, but it is perceived. People interrupt you less, criticism loses its impact, and glances stop measuring you and begin evaluating you with caution. Not because you have become aggressive, but because you have become impenetrable. This is true power, mastering yourself to the point where no one else can. Once these 7 errors disappear, the man who emerges is no longer vulnerable. He becomes calculated, steady, silent, and impossible to manipulate. In the end, everything returns to a single law: A man who wins within himself is never defeated from the outside. Machiavelli would understand this easily. He knew that before influencing any territory, one had to master the inner one: posture, silence, emotion, gaze, rhythm, presence. When these elements align, you stop being just another body in the room and become a fixed, stable point that reshapes everything around you, not through explicit force but through the invisible structure that sustains your existence. This ritual of power is not a ceremony. It is a daily practice of restraint, observation, and self-awareness. Every time you resist the urge to over-explain, every time you hold the silence, every time you control your reaction, you reinforce a fortress no one sees but everyone feels. Gradually, the environment stops testing you. It stops pushing through you. It stops overlooking you. Your presence becomes firm, and that firmness becomes inevitable. This is the moment when respect stops being requested and starts becoming natural. Now comes the final step, the phrase that seals this inner path. Win first within yourself so no one can defeat you from the outside. If this truth made sense to you, not emotionally but strategically, leave a comment saying, "I remove my errors." This declaration is not a confession. It is a decision. It marks the moment when you stop being read by the world and begin writing your own presence. And do not stop here. The next video continues the construction of your internal axis and deepens what was started in this one. If you want to expand the territory you control, inside and out, watch the next part of the sequence. The game is silent, but progress is inevitable for those who choose to observe before acting.